Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining our launching webinar for the Hybrid Reality Roundup. I'm Jeff Fisher, your host. I'm VP of Strategic Alliances at Kemp, really, privileged and honored to be able to host this new community that we've developed. We really want to make it about the community and have you guys participate and engage. I speak a lot, so I get to hear myself speak all the time. It's really more about finding out more about how hybrid cloud is impacting your organizations or other organizations that you support, and we'll talk a little bit more about the components and the different aspects. I'm joined by one of my partners in crime, Bhargav Shukla, who's Director of Technology for my team, and he's going to introduce you to really sort of the centerpiece of this community, which is a serial eBook on hybrid reality, a guide for hybrid cloud practitioners. So he'll talk about the eBook project and really provide an overview, and then also take you through some of the key elements of Chapter 1, and then talk a little bit also about how what you can expect from future chapters of the ebook as well, because the format is going to be a combination of both, obviously content and overview, but a very healthy dose of hands-on technical demonstrations and examples. And then last but not least, our special guest to kick things off, our good friend Kenny Lowe from brightsolid, who is one of the foremost experts on Azure Stack, and Azure Stack is Microsoft's platform for hybrid cloud. So obviously a great way to kick things off with respect to the HRR. So again, before I turn things over to Bhargav and then to Kenny, I just wanted to give you some context on the genesis of the HRR. Obviously, a day doesn't go by where you don't read or watch something about public hyperscale clouds, whether that's Amazon, Azure, or Google. The noise has gotten to just a level that's incredible, right? Everything has sort of a cloud washing element to it, if you will. It's there's absolute truth in the hype. There's the growth of AWS as a business has been remarkable. Microsoft's been doing a good job catching up. Google is investing heavily, and there's no question now. I saw an article this morning about I think it was really more about the CIO laggards and how those types of folks who said, hey, we'll never use public cloud are quickly becoming a thing of the past, right? You just can't deny that whether it's on the test and dev side or even on into production, everyone is using a hyperscale cloud for something. The proof is in the data. Gartner's got some great research that they did on this last year, hopefully soon to be refreshed this year, which shows that although there's been this meteoric rise of public cloud, they estimate that only 17% of what they call system infrastructure or infrastructure as a service will actually be hosted in a true hyperscale cloud by 2020, right? And at that number today, I think as of the point they published the data last year was about 7.5%, right? So still a relatively small percentage of overall infrastructure sits in these public hyperscale clouds. So that begs a simple question: where's the other stuff going to live? Well, it's going to live on-prem. In a generic sense, that could really either mean in a data center that's controlled by an enterprise themselves or a small medium enterprise, a government organization, whoever it might be, the end customer, if you will, or increasingly also another sort of quote-unquote on-prem is the regional service provider's data center, right? So something that's not considered a hyperscale cloud, because really the hyperscale cloud business is now a three-horse race. There were a lot of would-be contenders for the last 5 or 10 years, and it's pretty clear now that that's, like many segments of IT, is a race between Amazon, Azure, and Google. So the regional CSPs can be considered another place, where organizations who don't want to maintain their own data centers because of so much shift to public cloud, because the economics are becoming hard to justify, will use a cloud service provider, MSP, hoster, whatever, an XSP to host their infrastructure and things that they may not feel comfortable putting into a public hyperscale cloud. So I think the bottom line is hybrid is the only way forward, but no one said it's going to be easy. Certainly, we don't want to give off that impression. I think a lot of what's going on with hybrid messaging now is that, yeah, hybrid is obvious. You're doing hybrid, and so you just need to figure it out. And here's some high level guidance. Hybrid is extremely complicated, very complex to manage. Sort of your traditional infrastructure, the way you've been running it in your own data center, and then trying to match that and map that up with hyperscale public cloud, which is very much a continuous development DevOps type of approach, right? And so it's going to be a rocky journey, but I think it's better to embrace it because it's really going to be that way probably forever. So that whole sort of dynamic, led us to a decision at the end of last year to have Bhargav write a serial ebook and on the topic of hybrid cloud. And again, I don't want to steal his thunder. He'll take you through more of the details. We thought it was also important, though, to have a companion community, which is where the HRR, or how the HRR was born. And you can see sort of our mission statement here, because we wanted to make sure that we had, different vehicles and channels to get out the, the information, right? So, through obviously through a newsletter, through this webinar, and really try to develop a bidirectional communication channel with you, with our community members, to find out, hey, what is it that we could put into the ebook that would be really compelling? Because it's a serial ebook and it's continuously developed, we've only written, or Bhargav's only written the first chapter, right? We have the rest of the book mapped out, but we've got a lot of flexibility in how we go about producing the content. The same thing with the webinars. We want people to, tell us about speakers that they recommend, and maybe they want to speak, and what kind of, content they'd like to see us cover here. And then, of course, we've got the HRR microsite, which is where most of you registered for this. Again, is another vehicle by which we can get information out and hopefully have you, give us some feedback. So with that said, I am going to turn things over now to Bhargav Shukla, who is going to take you through his serial ebook project. Take it away, Bhargav.
Thank you, Jeff. So hi, I'm Bhargav Shukla. Like Jeff mentioned earlier, I work for the Alliances team with him and look after our technology needs, which gives me a tremendous opportunity, in fact, to work on the bleeding edge stuff. I have been working with Azure, Azure Stack. Of course, hybrid is the running theme, and it becomes more loud as we see more players, more organizations adapting cloud, and more providers. Of course, like Jeff mentioned, the three providers are standing out among others. So let's take a quick look at what hybrid looks like, or what it means. And for that, if we step back a little bit and think about existing infrastructure, on-premises deployments, and your own data centers, or even co-located data centers. that's what we consider on-premises. And in past, we had that as a way to deploy any of the systems, any application that you need. If you are the IT enabling the business unit's asking you for the systems that they need to carry out the business, whether it's a pure ID shop or whether it's a business, let's say a pharmaceuticals company for an example, then the business is about selling the products that they come up with and they find. For you as an IT, it's your job to enable them for whatever they need, whether it's a web portal from where the distributors are going to put their orders in, if it is the system that is used to communicate with FDA for the approvals of the drugs, and so on. And of course, that's just one example, but there are many businesses that each have their unique needs. From there, you're probably very familiar with the trend that picked up quite a few years ago, which made you switch from physical servers to virtual platforms, whether it's VMware or Microsoft's Hyper-V. I crisply remember going to VMware, the first one being the VMware server, which ran on top of Linux or Windows servers, and then you were able to virtualize more servers on it. And then things became better, more streamlined, more efficient with VMware ESXi. Microsoft, of course, bringing the Hyper-V to the table. And there are more products, obviously, that you can use as hypervisors and virtualize your workloads, which made things easier for the on-prem deployments. But then came the cloud. You had Microsoft Azure, you have Amazon Web Services, and of course there were many other providers, smaller providers, call it private cloud, if you will. And then the players like VMware vCloud Air, which was a public cloud, another public cloud that was a foray into the larger space. But when you think of cloud, especially the early deployment of cloud, was all about your system either lives in cloud or it doesn't. It did not have any way of providing the coexistence where you can have your front end live in Microsoft Azure, for an example, and then your database is maybe for security reason or whatever, one of many reasons, needs to stay on premises and need to have a VPN connection between the two, some sort of hybrid deployment. In early phases, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to do so. The other thing, even though as the time passed and the cloud offerings became better, became more expansive and more inclusive, one of the ideas were to have the cloud first deployments or have the migrate everything to cloud mentality, where let's think of cloud first and let's see what we can move to cloud now. The reality, however, is that you have need to keep systems on premises for one of many reasons. It could be security, it could be compliance, it could be data sovereignty laws of your country that you're in. One of many reasons why you can't or don't want to move certain workloads in cloud offerings, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, or whether it's a Google Cloud Platform. So that gives you that mix of hybrid deployments. And that's really what the book also encompasses. Like Jeff mentioned, we want to have your feedback as well, since it's a serial ebook and we write the chapters in sort of installments that you will get every couple of months. So your feedback can be very helpful for us creating the content that's going to be useful to you. So before I go to the book overview, let me ask you a question. How many of you are either using a public cloud platform today or considering of using one of the cloud platforms in coming months, in coming year? The three platforms I have up here is Microsoft's Azure, Amazon's AWS, and Google's cloud platform GCP. So I'd love to hear about the platform that you're either using, are familiar with, or considering. If you can
Bhargav,
please, yes.
just while people are filling out that thing, I neglected to do a couple of housekeeping items at the beginning because of my audio problems. So let me do that quickly now. So
Sure.
now's a good time to tell everyone that we're recording this. So hopefully that's not a problem for everyone. We obviously do that for purposes of sharing the webinar after. If you have questions, there's a Q&A panel at the bottom, so click on that. Please don't hesitate to queue up some questions for Bhargav and ultimately for Kenny when he comes online. And there should also be a resources tab that has a couple of links, I think, to Bhargav's blog, Kenny's blog. So apologies again, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So yes, it would be great if you can please just take a quick moment, and then I'll move on to the poll results. All right, so let's take a quick look here. I see quite a few Azure, some AWS, and some GCP. It's good to hear that there is some distribution across all three. We do see that Microsoft Azure has been not only catching up on the terms of feature set, considering AWS was ahead in the game when it started, but Microsoft has spent a lot of time, a lot of resources, and providing customers with what they're looking for. So when I'm seeing that 90% of you guys who are joining the call are considering or using Azure, it certainly is some validation into what I have been hearing personally and what we have been seeing in the market, both from Gartner's perspective, in the leadership quadrants for cloud, and for the usage from the practitioner perspective when we talk to our customers and partners. Thanks for taking the survey. So let's take a quick look at what the eBook looks like. And if I start with the sections on the left, basically the eBook is divided into some logical sections that gives you details around specifics, starting with cloud computing basics, where I'm talking about planning, going over some terminology and infrastructure as a service basics and so on. But the idea is that each section caters to the important pieces that touch or has touch points with the cloud, with the hybrid cloud as well. When you think about migration, for an example, you have licensing implications. You have to consider how you can use your existing licensing agreements, if you have any. Can you save on licensing cost? What if you're starting a new system deployment and need to consider licensing? What are different ways of licensing your workloads in Azure or AWS and so on? How do you transition legacy applications that you have on premises into the cloud? What resources do you have that you can use to migrate the systems to the cloud offering, whether it's AWS or Azure and whatnot? Then you have the hyperconvert systems For an example, you probably have heard of Nutanix and a couple other options available on premises. The idea with hyperconverged systems really is it's a singular unit. For an example, you have all of your required storage, processing capacity, networking pieces as well, all are enclosed into a single offering, whether it's a full rack with the servers and switches and storage included, or you have something like Azure Stack, which is in technical preview right now, that provides you with ease of management of the system. Really is what the idea is, considering if it's a single server or multiple servers that you're managing on premises and you have, say for an example, VMware, you have to do the installation, you have to manage the systems, you have to manage the networking and storage that supports the entire infrastructure. Hyperconverged systems aims at taking away that management overhead and making things easier by including automation into the mix, as well as making the unit a singular system, which then helps with the troubleshooting and support as well, because then you have a single vendor to work with for the entire end-to-end system. When you're thinking of cloud and hybrid, scaling is one of the concerns. Compared to on-premises, for an example, when you have to scale, either it means that you have to have a pre-planned capacity requirements that are in place so that when you have a peak demand, you're able to scale. Or if that's not the case, it becomes very difficult to scale because you either don't have the systems and then the procurement process has to be followed in order to get the required capacity, whether it's additional servers, whether it's additional storage, or whether it's additional network gear. When it comes to cloud offerings, however, you're using the hyperscale that's offered by each provider, and they do the capacity management, so you can on demand spin up the resources that you need, as many resources as you need. So how to use the scaling functionality that's offered is covered in that section. And of course, the similar goes for the other sections: monitoring, disaster recovery, and automation, each one of them being important enough to familiarize yourself if you're not using some of those functionalities, as well as understand that how to make your IT more efficient by leveraging the offerings from cloud. Because adding more human resources is one way of scaling, but that's not most effective scaling. When it comes to IT systems, automation provides you a way to scale quite effectively. And in Azure, for an example, when you're using the resource manager templates, it provides you with a way to consistently deploy your services in repetitive fashion without any human intervention, besides, of course, running the commands or scripts to actually deploy the system using the given template. And that gets rid of a lot of issues that you most commonly see in the past. I'm guilty of making mistakes when either deploying or managing the systems. And that's the human factor that will always be there as long as you have human intervention required. People make mistakes, and we all learn from it. There is no getting away from it. But using automation and using the tools available from these offerings makes address that problem with reducing the errors as much as possible where possible. So the book is, again, designed to address all these many different aspects that touches your IT in general anyway, but more specific to cloud and hybrid deployments. If you take a look at quick overview of the chapter 1, by the way, chapter 1 is already published. It's out there for you to download. So if you haven't downloaded already, you can go ahead and do so. what I'm talking about in chapter 1 really is starting with the cloud computing basics. For an example, look at the 3 different providers, Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud Platform. Looking at differences, strengths, and weaknesses of each provider, and what they have to offer, how many regions, for an example, that Azure offers and AWS offers worldwide, things like that. I also talk about classifications of services. You have software as a service, for an example, Office 365, where you sign up and in minimal amount of time you start consuming the services. You can deploy new mailboxes, you can start using new team website from SharePoint and so on. Then you have platform as a service, which is aimed primarily towards developers who are developing the applications and deploying the applications. The platform as a service makes it easier for them to worry only about their code, and the required prerequisites are met by the platform as a service offering, where the operating system is installed, where the prerequisites are met. You don't really have to worry about managing the infrastructure and operating system. And then you have the infrastructure as a service, which provides you a very flexible offering where you can create your own virtual machines. And for the IT professionals who manage their own data centers, who managed their own virtual infrastructure, are probably most familiar with is the ability to have flexibility of creating things that they want. They want to create a VM of certain size and install certain things. You can do that with infrastructure as a service. You can pick the size of the virtual machine. You can create a virtual network where all the virtual machines will connect to each other and provide different services. So in the book, I define all of those different definitions and classifications in chapter 1. And I also talk about tools and resources, different tools and resources that help you carry out different things when you're considering cloud. For an example, you want to see if the virtual machines that you're using another example is the VM optimization. For an example, if you're running any VMs and you want to make sure that those VMs meet the requirements to run in Azure, or if there is a way to optimize them so that you can get the most out of deploying those VMs in Azure, or even reduce the cost, for an example. There are different tools that are available, and I talk about those tools in the chapter 1 as well. So with that, I would like to pass it back to Jeff. Jeff, please go ahead, and we'll have Kenny talk.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bhargav. It was a great overview. Lots more to come on the ebook, as Bhargav noted. For those of you who may have gotten into this webinar directly through an On24 invite, make sure that you go to hybridrealityroundup.com. That's where the ebook is hosted. First chapter is published, and we will be continually updating that PDF, adding the sections as Bhargav and team write them. So now let's turn things over to Kenny Lowe. He's head of emerging technologies at BrightSolid. He's going to talk to us about Azure Stack. A topic certainly near and dear to my heart and to the rest of Kemp. Kenny's been in the industry for a long time. He's a long-time Microsoft MVP, but just recently became an Azure MVP. No question in my mind why that's the case. He's extremely active online, on social, on his blog, and will share some great info with us today about Azure Stack.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. Just before I continue to do the audio check,
you at all. You probably sound like I sounded before, unfortunately.
Okay.
So not sure if
In that case, I'll switch to plan B. Is that
plan B? Yeah, plan B is much better. Wow, and your plan B switchover was much faster than mine.
Yeah, that was a hybrid phone setup.
Exactly. Go for it.
Cool. So thanks, Jeff. I'll kick off then. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Like Jeff said, I'm Kenny. For the last 7 years or so, I've worked as head of emerging technologies for brightsolid. We're a regional hosting provider based in Scotland. As Jeff said, I'm also a newly minted Azure Stack MVP. I think the only one in Britain, and I still have that fresh out of the box MVP smell still lingering on there. Day to day, my job revolves around ensuring that our technical roadmap is future-proofed both for ourselves and for our customers. And so, of course, for the last few years, my focus has been around cloud technologies, and as a hosting provider, in particular, hybrid cloud technologies. I think it's fair to say that the aspiration of hybrid cloud has never really married up with the reality that people find themselves in today, which is more of a multi-cloud world. We've had years now of being told that we'll be able to burst apps seamlessly to the cloud in periods of peak demand, that we'll be able to take advantage of workload portability between clouds and vendors and so on without any risk of lock-in. But actually, the reality that we find ourselves in today is this sort of multi-cloud model where we have 101 vendors all touting their particular variant of cloud, all with their own definitions of what cloud is and what it means, with many purporting to mitigate lock-in through X, Y, or Z clever technology. Now, for every one of these solutions out there today, there's a knowledge tax that goes hand in hand with it, both for existing staff and for onboarding new staff. If every new investment you make into cloud technology means bespoke training for your staff, then it's not a business model that settles into stability over time. So in economics, we have this rule of thumb called the rule of three, which suggests there will be up to 3 major competitors in any industry, with a few smaller players finding a niche out with the realms of those top 3. And we see this play out time and time again in the IT industry, in operating systems, in mobile OSs, in web browsers, virtualization, and now into cloud. With operating systems, we've settled long ago into Windows and the Linux variants. In mobile operating systems, we have Android and iOS, and actually I love that example, because it shows that no matter how much money Microsoft throw at that situation, once the dust of an industry is settled, it's next to impossible to break into it. iOS and Android have that market penetration and that developer critical mass that holds them aloft while that industry remains. So in terms of cloud, I guess we only really talk about Azure, AWS, and Google from my perspective now. So yeah, when I'm talking about cloud, I draw this distinction quite clearly between virtualization and cloud, which I think a lot more people need to start doing. Adding a web portal to a virtualization stack and providing IaaS does not a cloud make. So while a solid foundation and strong knowledge was being developed in the world of enterprise IT around virtualization, over to the side, the cloud-native world was emerging and evolving independently with different goals and different design patterns to it. It doesn't actually matter now how much lipstick or how much gloss we add onto our virtualization platforms. They haven't developed in the same way with the same basic tenets, and so we can never make them these cloud-native platforms. So in terms of virtualization, by far the most common virtualization stacks we see in the industry today are VMware and Hyper-V. And in the cloud-native world, we see, as I've said, Azure and AWS and Google Cloud Platform being the predominant players here. It's interesting, you'll see that we're this far into a presentation about Azure Stack, and this is the first time I've mentioned the word Azure. This is because by far the most important thing we can do today is appropriately set the scene around what cloud is, rather than diving straight into the more typical infrastructure up approach of look at what my cloud can do. So there are a few differences in the ways that virtualization and cloud platforms are designed, but by far and away the most important from our perspective is the application design patterns that they're best suited to support. The cloud has this rich and varied selection of pre-built PaaS services and automation features that really lend itself to that cloud mentality of fail fast, learn fast, iterate fast. In many ways, virtualization is an evolution of physical infrastructures, And most of the applications that run in virtualized infrastructures today still follow that sort of monolithic 1, 2, 3-tier application. It's not really suited to scale out or to survive massive infrastructure failure without needing convoluted disaster recovery plans. And this really shows when it comes to looking at where our investments lie in each platform. When designing for virtualization, we focus on the infrastructure specifically in order to ensure the highest availability of the application. We at brightsolid have storage platforms that we operate at 7 nines availability for our virtualization platforms because it's that important to deliver applications to that level of resiliency. When designing for cloud, well, actually, to date, we've had no ownership over the infrastructure. There is no ability to focus on the infrastructure to support the application. We've had to support the application itself. So in the early days of cloud, when things we take for granted in virtualization just didn't exist, like live migration, for example, and where suddenly developers had access to multiple sites or regions at the tip of their API-driven fingertips, application design patterns arose which enabled mass scale-out of microservice-based applications really for the first time. And it's that sort of architecture that lends itself to surviving an entire region dying at the application layer without really needing to worry about disaster recovery itself as such. So there are features and capabilities available in public cloud providers that in some cases make life significantly easier, and in some cases simply don't exist anywhere else. This is slightly tangential, I guess, but a year or so ago, I wrote a hybrid application in C#, which ran partly on premises and partly in Azure, making use of Azure Media Services to automatically subtitle videos at a cost of literally pennies to myself. This app just wouldn't have been possible without the PaaS capabilities of Azure. And it's that rich and varied PaaS landscape that makes it so attractive to developers. Why develop something from the ground up yourself when it's a solved problem in the cloud? So like Jeff said earlier, only 17% of IaaS will be hosted in a hyperscale cloud by 2020, asterisk, says Gartner. And one of the core reasons for this is that lifting and shifting existing traditional applications just doesn't always work. For those workloads, we have virtualization, which is a tried and tested world, and we tend to recommend that cloud native is for this new generation of microservice-based and PaaS-based workloads. So with all that in mind then, what then is Azure Stack to Azure? Well, the answer is, simply put, it's Azure shrunk down to a smaller footprint and delivered from a service provider or from within your own on-premises data centers or from a cruise ship, a submarine or an oil rig or wherever your data needs to be. It's the hyperscale cloud delivered locally. It's not simply designed to have the same look and feel, it's the same code base, it's the same features, it's the same skill set needed to manage it. The joy of Azure Stack is in the Azure Resource Manager, which Bhargav mentioned earlier. So the orchestration layer of Azure, which orchestrates everything beneath it. There isn't a separate Azure and Azure Stack code base here. It's the same on-premises as it is in the public hyperscale cloud. An end user interacting with Azure and with Azure Stack use the same tools. They have the same portal experience. They have the same APIs with a couple of caveats to be aware of there. An application designed to run in Azure will be able to run in Azure Stack using the same IaaS and, over time, PaaS services that are available in the hyperscale cloud. This is the first true hybrid cloud platform where the skill sets needed to manage between on-premises, service provider, and hyperscale are the same. So in order to be able to deliver that rapid cadence of updates that constantly flow into Azure, and in order to ensure that an Azure Stack that you consume from one vendor is consistent in experience and capabilities of another vendor, or indeed with public Azure itself, Azure Stack is going to be delivered as an appliance, in the first instance from Dell EMC, HPE, and Lenovo, with Cisco following later in the year. This appliance-based approach has a myriad of benefits, from guaranteeing that consistency we spoke about earlier, to enabling updates to be tested rigorously on known hardware in a known configuration before ever being pushed to customers, who then get to decide within a constrained time window when to actually apply the updates. I guess also with every component within the infrastructure and known quantity, security can be far more rigorous, delivering a far more lockdown security model than I've seen in any other virtualization stack. And yes, for anyone thinking of the WannaCry outbreak earlier in the week, SMB1 is not available within Azure Stack. NTLM is not available either. In fact, all legacy protocols are removed. There's no need for them, so why have them? We can remove everything which could potentially be compromised by anything that's not needed. So authentication between infrastructure components, for example, is mostly certificate driven. with some Kerberos in there as well. There's no need for legacy protocols at all. We, as the service provider here, cannot even log into these hosts. We can't log into Hyper-V. We can't make any changes to them directly. Our access layer is through an admin web portal, much like a SAN. And it's really that appliance-based approach which is going to enable this rapid cadence of innovation on premises that already exists within the hyperscale cloud. For those of you who want to test Azure Stack without wanting to buy an appliance, there is the one-node development kit available, so you can install Azure Stack on basically any hardware you want that meets certain prereqs. It won't be supported, but it will run, which is pretty cool, and that will be supported in perpetuity even after launching go live. So we don't have exact feature parity with Azure at general availability. This is due to some of the past features in Azure requiring large-scale infrastructure in order to run, with others just not quite meeting the high priority list for day one launch. At the middle of this year, when it launches, the features which will be lit up and available, I've got some highlighted on the slide there. We've got all the core IaaS functionality with blob tabling queue storage. We have Azure App Service delivering web, mobile, and API app functionality, as well as the awesomeness that is serverless computing in the form of Azure Functions. We have MySQL as a service, MSSQL as a service, and Azure Key Vault. And over time, more of the features in Azure will light up in Azure Stack, bringing more and more parity to this true hybrid model. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago at Build, Microsoft announced some Azure features being released to us at the edge, including machine learning and Azure Functions. In fact, if I'd been doing this presentation 3 weeks ago, I would have said machine learning was one of those things that needs hyperscale to run most effectively, and yet here it is now able to run on something the size of a Raspberry Pi, doing edge-scale analytics and data consolidation, then firing a subset of relevant and valuable data up to Azure or Azure Stack for storage and further analysis. That is awesome, and it's the true hybrid cloud and the intelligent edge being brought together really for the first time. I know of some IoT scenarios where IoT devices which don't support session tickets are firing huge amounts of data up to Azure for processing and analysis and incurring some pretty massive network costs. The closer to the edge you can do your consolidation and initial analytics, the more relevant data you can send up to the cloud for full-on processing and long-term storage, the better. So yeah, while it's true we don't have full parity at GA, this will come, and it will come fairly quickly. And where things aren't there on day one, so for example, we don't have the Azure Layer 7 load balancer, the app gateway, and the Layer 4 load balancer targeted more internal scenarios. We do have the Azure Marketplace and Azure Stack Marketplace really to fill in some gaps in the interim. So the Azure Stack Marketplace is a subset of those marketplace items available within Azure. So for those who don't know, software vendors can create a golden image of their software, submit it to Azure, have it go through a validation process, and have it available to deploy by people within the Azure cloud. A lot of these are single VM scenarios. Some of them are network appliances. Some of them are multi-VM scenarios. But all of them have been tested at hyperscale now and have that sort of assurance that they will work well and they will work to the best of the vendor's belief in that product. Now, every single one of these marketplace items takes up disk space, so they won't automatically be in our Azure Stack Marketplace or your Azure Stack Marketplace. You decide what you want to have available to your end users within Azure Stack. And really the process of syndicating those is 2 mouse button clicks. You choose the item that you want to syndicate, you click download, and that gets brought down from Azure into your Azure Stack Marketplace to use right there. So we have the Kemp load balancers here. For example, we have Windows Server images, we have GitLab, LAMP, Magento, and all sorts of very useful things for people just to start consuming out of the box. And anyone that's used Azure Pack in the past knows how much pain this will save. No longer do we have to build our own golden images for every single thing we want to provide to customers. No. Instead, we get tried and tested at hyperscale, fully battle-tested images that we can just syndicate with 2 clicks. And that, for me, is absolutely glorious.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I
so,
think we're also. This is Jeff. We're also proud to say that at this point, I think we are the skinniest image out there. So no image bloat from Kemp. We're not gonna suck up all your storage.
It's good, and that's a genuine consideration when you're scanning through the list of the different marketplace items there. You can see this one's 120 gigs, this one's 30 gigs, this one's 20 gigs. So I'm going to pick a bunch of these ones which don't take up that much space over the bigger bloated ones. So yeah, absolutely a consideration. Okay, so I guess to sum up, the entire goal here is to deliver the world's first truly hybrid cloud platform. This removes vendor lock-in, and this is vendor lock-in, not platform. It removes lock-in in the same way as developing for Windows or for Linux, enables you to run across a myriad of different hardware vendors. This will allow you to run applications developed for Azure or for Azure Stack across a myriad of different service providers on premises or in the hyperscale for the first time. And that's really a truly unique offering. It enables app portability between providers. It enables skill set cross-pollination between on-prem and cloud. And really, it fundamentally brings that explosion of innovation that's happened in the public cloud out of Microsoft data centers and brings it back to yours. And importantly for me, to mine. So that's a wonderful time to be involved in. And I guess that I'll just hand back to Jeff now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kenny. Fantastic job as expected. I would encourage everyone, we're kind of bumping up against the hour. If you have Azure Stack questions, you couldn't be asking them to a bigger expert. So don't be shy. Use the Q&A pane. Otherwise, I'm gonna take up the remaining time with some questions I have for Kenny, which I think we probably should do now before we save the last few minutes for a quick final poll and then some concluding information. So I guess while people are thinking about their questions, maybe one for you, Kenny, about inquiring minds want to know when you talked about the fact that the integrated systems are it's a small pool of providers today. Only 4 when Cisco hops into the mix. I know that was a very controversial announcement that didn't receive the greatest feedback when Microsoft made it. I personally understand Microsoft's rationale, wanting to keep the quality there and making sure the experience is as rock solid as possible. What's your expectation personally on how we'll move beyond those first 4 time frame, and do you think it will ever get to a white box scenario, or is that just wishful thinking?
In terms of white box scenario, I wouldn't necessarily hold out much hope for the next few years, which was an initial blow to myself, as with many, because I was expecting and hoping to be able to run Azure Stack on top of existing hardware that we had and not have to make another new cloud investment. But actually, first of all, I guess this is a deep cloud investment for us. This is the first time we've actually had cloud running on premises in our data centers. But in terms of how will this evolve over time, I think that, and I'm just guessing here, so don't hold me to any of this, but my expectation would be that the next piece of Azure Stack to get opened up will be the storage APIs. So I'd expect Microsoft's next foray into expanding Azure Stack hardware ecosystem to enable vendors like Dell EMC and so on to be able to plug their own storage into the back end. Right now, it has to be hyper-converged using storage spaces direct, and there are a lot of people crying out to be able to plug in existing storage there. So I think that'll probably be our next step. But for anyone that wants to run on their own hardware just now, there is the one-node POC. You can run on any hardware that you want. And I've heard of some people starting to offer that as what they call single node as a service, SNAS, for non-production critical workloads, and just running a single node unsupported like that. So that's an interesting take on it. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Just looking in the queue here, I don't see any questions. I think we have time for one more. Bhargav, I'm not sure if you had any for Kenny. I've got a couple. So,
yeah, no, and so I did have one question. And Kenny, I think the question's more about the heritage workloads. You talked about heritage workloads. What do you see as the prime candidates, legacy or heritage workloads for Azure Stack?
Yeah, so the first thing we always say to customers is what applications do you have? What customer facing or back-end web apps do you have that we could potentially move into the app service within Azure Stack? And also, what applications do you have that have a rich data set that you want to start exposing through, say, a mobile app that we can build in Azure Stack as well? One of the great things about Azure Stack is that you can have it sitting side by side almost with your existing heritage applications. So the latency concerns of doing almost web app to traditional database are gone in that scenario. So it can open up new possibilities there as well.
Perfect. Looks cool, like we do have one from the crowd, which we'll take. We're literally bumping up on time, but will there be a TP4, or will Azure Stack go live for the next step? As far as we know, and I think Kenny can confirm, TP3 is the last technical preview, and Microsoft will be GAing this. It's kind of tough, right, because it's not like Windows Server. They're not going to put it GA. It's only available through the integrated systems vendors in a production capacity. Yeah. But I guess there'll be a GA code base that can be used for the single node, and our expectation is still sometime mid-2017. Correct, Kenny?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. There may be another TP3 refresh. So we've already had TP3 and TP3 refresh. There may be a TP3 refresh between now and GA, but TP4, no, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I hate to cut off the conversation. I mean, this is great, and it's exactly the kind of, input we want. But unfortunately, due to my audio mishap, and I guess Kenny's he had an instant failover. We know not to use VoIP again. We need to press forward here. So thank you so much, Kenny, for a great segment on Azure Stack. We'd love to have you back. And for the audience, if you could just take a quick look at this poll and really let us know what kind of content engagement is most valuable to you, we greatly appreciate it. We will be following up with all the community members to do not an extensive survey, but just a little more depth on this to peel this back. And again, we want to make sure that we're building content that you want, that's valuable to you, valuable to your job, valuable to your organization. Certainly no point in just writing more stuff that no one's going to consume. So let's see what we got here in terms of, so the demo how-to videos. Okay, no surprise there. We already actually do have a couple of those up on the Hybrid Reality Roundup website, so you should go check out the video session, including Kurt Young's TP3 marketplace syndication demo, which has been a real hit. I know Kenny touched on that briefly in his section. Live Q&A is great, and the expert opinion analysis. Okay, so again, at least getting some guidance here for what we should be focused on when we spend time creating content. So with that said, I think most of you probably have already registered. If you got here through, again, an On24 link that I posted on social, make sure you visit hybridrealityroundup.com. That's our Microsoft site. Register there. We'll get you the updates to the ebook as soon as they're published. We're going to be putting more videos, more content up there, Bhargav's resources from the ebook, and a whole bunch of stuff, as well as information about the webinar recordings, and so on and so forth. We do plan to put out a newsletter every 2 months, also a webinar every 2 months as well. Will kind of coincide with a new chapter that gets published. So Bhargav can take you through that. Kurt will join as well to do some hands-on demos for us. And if you do sign up and register now, we are going to be publishing our full report on Azure Application Delivery by the numbers. It's our second annual survey of our Azure install base, some great feedback there with specifics on exactly what kinds of applications and services real customers are deploying in production in Azure. And in fact, we've had Microsoft folks on the Azure team sort of chomping at the bit to get access to that data, because due to privacy, they really don't have a view inside, rightfully so, inside people's Azure subscriptions. Any feedback whatsoever, how we can improve it, please send it to hrr@kemptechnologies.com. What topics, if you want to recommend yourself as a speaker or a colleague as a speaker. As always, thanks to everyone, to Bhargav, to Kenny, to Perry, who's behind the scenes making it all work. And until next time, stay safe, be well, and we will speak to you all again soon. Thank you.